Welcome to You Don't Know Ball. Today, we're here with Cody, the owner of Houston Football. We're going to be talking about the general vibe kind of going into the new season for the Houston Texans, as well as discussing their offseason. So, Cody, just to kind of kick it off, obviously the draft was a big day for a lot of teams. You guys moved out of the first round. So, kind of two questions here. What was your favorite pick by the Texans? And then also, how did you feel about trading back out of the first with the Vikings?
Well, I'll start with the second question first. The trade back, I didn't love it at the time because it was like, looking in the oven before everything was cooked. Like in the moment, I didn't love the trade. I didn't like what they got. I didn't like moving out of the first round. I was thinking to myself, what if this player falls? What if that player falls? So on and so forth. But then when they use that future second round pick to go get Stephon Diggs, you're like, okay, like the cake's baking now. And now I kind of see what it looks like here. Like, okay, it's starting to look a lot better. And then Nick Caserio is going to be, always aggressive. And you look at some of the wide receivers that probably weren't going to make it to the Texans. You look at where the Texans were positioned in the second round. And like, it was going to be kind of a tough thing to guarantee you were going to get a wide receiver upgrade. So they're like, okay, Stephon Diggs. And the way Nick Caserio talks about it, it's like that thing kind of plopped in their lap. I don't think they were like constantly calling around. I think they surprisingly got the opportunity to trade for Stephon Diggs, and then they were happy to make the trade. So I don't know that the move back was intended to get Stephon Diggs, but it became a product of the move back. And then ultimately when they go to make their selections, they get a couple of guys that would have been fun options for them that went where they would have picked in the first round. So you're kind of thinking, okay, like is that player and what they do in the second round with the second pick, is that going to be as good as Stephon Diggs and what they do with the other pick? And I would tell you most of the time it's going to be no. I mean, my favorite player in the draft was Quinyon Mitchell, and he didn't get to the Texans pick at 23. The Eagles snatched him up. So once they got into the draft, my favorite pick they made was Cade Stover. I mean, he was one of my favorite players. I felt like there's a chance he could be the second best tight end in this draft. There's a laundry list of tight ends that went ahead of him that had no business going ahead of him. When you think about his production, what he brought to the table, and being new to the position. I mean, this guy was one of the most targeted guys at Ohio State with all that wide receiver talent at Ohio State. And that was last year and this year. So, I mean, you got Marvin Harrison Jr., you got Ibuka, who's going to be a first-rounder next year for the Buckeyes. You got other 5-star, 4-star guys, and the third most targeted guy and the third guy in receptions, Cade Stover. And he barely learned how to play tight end a couple years ago. He's playing defensive line before that. Like, I love what Cade Stover brings to the table. He's been super productive early on in the position, and he's got a good guy to watch and learn from in Dalton Schultz for the next couple of years. And right when it's time to move on from Dalton Schultz, that should be Cade Stover ascension time. I love the Cade Stover pick.
Yeah, I think that was a great pick for them, especially because when you take into account like tight ends, they typically will take a couple years to develop. And Dalton Schultz is one of the better tight ends in the league, in my opinion. He's nothing to scoff at, especially when you're throwing him into a wide receiver core, Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, even, Tank Dell, if he's coming back fully healthy, which it seems like he is. And I personally really love the Kamari Lassiter pick. I think when we are looking at the Texans, we're like, okay, if we're going to take a look at their defense, they have Stingley and they have other pieces, but adding a guy like Kamari Lassiter, I think, was a really good addition to that cornerback room. And honestly, we'll get to talk about the offseason, but me and Dobbs both agree that this offseason for the Texans was probably one of the best in the NFL, if not the best.
It was dynamite. It was dynamite. It was awesome. It was one of the most fun off seasons I've ever seen from a team, period. And then it's certainly one of the most fun off seasons the Texans have ever had, certainly.
Yeah, no, I know you guys are absolutely ecstatic about it down there in Houston, I'm sure. So the question I have to ask next is, and we might have already touched on this, we already touched on a couple of these guys, but, because you could have a different answer. What was your just favorite move of the entire offseason, given how many good moves the Texans made?
Oh, it's Danielle Hunter. I mean, the guy is an absolute monster. Like, I mean, he is one of the top guys when it comes to pass rush consistency and tied for the league leading tackles for a loss last year, and he did it in sort of anonymity by himself in Minnesota. Like, Minnesota doesn't have and didn't have a great pass rusher opposite Danielle Hunter. And the way they ended up with Danielle Hunter, they struck out on Saquon Barkley. They didn't get him. That was unfortunate. But they ended up pivoting to Joe Mixon, which was a nice addition. And then they were trying to get a deal done with San Francisco and then get ultimately a contract extension done to get Eric Armstead. And ultimately that didn't work out. That fell through. They looked around and Danielle Hunter became an option, and they went and made the big investment on Danielle Hunter. And he gets to play opposite an elite pass rusher in the reigning defending defensive rookie of the year in Will Anderson, and they're going to be feeding off of each other. It's not often that a team goes through a season, sets the team record for sacks, and then you feel like they improved going into the next year when they swapped out 3 of the 4 starters on the defensive line. But that's how I feel with this defense and that defensive line. And I love the Danielle Hunter move. That was my favorite. And then right behind it, really close, I'm actually, doing a deep dive on this here soon on the site and on my channel. But Azeez Al-Shaair, the linebacker that they brought over from Tennessee, I mean, he's DeMeco Ryans on the field. Like, he is going to be the extension of the head coach on the field. Hearing him talk about what he expects out of the Texans and hearing what DeMeco Ryans expects out of him and his mentality, it's just perfect. I mean, he gave a 4 or 5 minute soliloquy about how you have to get used to doing the boring stuff because that's what makes you good. Because once you do the boring stuff and it's automatic, then you can start training your body that it doesn't have to think on the harder stuff, the stuff that's exciting. And I'm just like, this guy's really exciting. He's going to be an upgrade at linebacker from what they put out there last year in primarily Denzel Perryman and Blake Cashman. He's a really, really good player. And I thought the funny part that he said about coming to the Texans was when they watch tape of how it's supposed to look in San Francisco, he can point out where he is on the tape in San Francisco, which I think is a really funny thing because DeMeco Ryans uses San Fran as sort of the ultimate standard for what the defense needs to do. And then Azeez Al-Shaair can say, oh, well, there I am. But of course, he's going to be in Fred Warner's job in the Texans version of the San Fran defense. So I like those 2 moves the most of the offseason.
No, and I'm really glad you said that about Azeez Al-Shaair because, Hunter will tell you that was one of the first things I talked about when, we were talking about Texas offseason. It's kind of like one of the things a lot of people glazed over was how productive he just was in that Niners defense. And again, not like he was unproductive last year, but the scheme change, not being in that DeMeco defense definitely didn't do him a ton of favors. But now coming back to where he's super familiar, where he has been at his best, playing his best football, I think it's a huge addition for you guys. I will admit, I was a little bit surprised that you guys didn't get something done with Cashman just for I feel like, Minnesota got something done relatively cheap for how he played at a pretty good level last year. But regardless, to your point, you guys replaced him with somebody who comes in, knows the system, can replace that role very well. And that's all you can do when you're trying to save money and invest to make a better team, which is exactly what you guys did. So,
I mean, their pivots have been, that's Nick Casario's kind of thing is when something doesn't work, his pivot game has been pretty good in changing things up, moving things around. I mean, he couldn't trade Deshaun Watson initially when he got here. The pivot that he made was sort of a unique process where he kind of had teams bid for their trade and then worked it with Deshaun because he had the no trade clause. He pivoted off of some moves that didn't work out for the team into some other moves. Hey, I have to take a quarterback, but I'm in love with this defensive lineman. Well, I'll just use that future draft capital to go up there and trade for Will Anderson. Hey, I can't bring Cashman back because from my understanding, their offer was pretty close. Cashman's from Minnesota.
Oh,
he gets to
okay.
go home, gets to go up there, played at Minnesota. So it was great for him to be back there. And so their pivot is, okay, we'll go get Azeez Al-Shaair. In between there, they tried to get Patrick Queen, but he was too expensive for him. So they're like, okay, we'll just pay a little bit more for Azeez Al-Shaair. Try to get Eric Armstead. They pivoted to Danielle Hunter. They didn't get Saquon Barkley. They got Joe Mixon. Nick Casario's ability to adjust on the fly is one of his best things about being a general manager.
Before
absolutely.
I move into my next question, I just want to say, honestly, getting Joe Mixon for 7th over having to pay Saquon, I think in the end of the day was probably the better move. Mixon constantly is super underrated across the league because he's not the most flashy individual, but he constantly produces. And another thing with the Danielle Hunter signing, the 2 years, what was it, $49 million, I believe? Or
yeah, I think it'll check out to about 52 when it's
52.
all said and done.
it's just for what you paid him and for how short the contract is, it was such a no-brainer type of move to make, especially putting him next to Will Anderson. And we saw such a amazing season that I don't think a lot of people expected out of the Houston Texans last year. Would it be wrong to say that this year is Super Bowl aspirations? Like, what are your expectations for the Houston Texans coming into this year?
Yeah, they've got to be better than last year, and they were 30 minutes away from playing in the AFC Championship last year. So how do you get better than last year? Well, you play in the AFC Championship. This organization's never been to the AFC Championship. The closest they got was hosting it when they led Kansas City 24-0, and then ultimately we all know how that happened, or what all happened there back in the day. So this organization, I mean, they've got to have AFC Championship aspirations, and I would tell you that based on what they've done this offseason, your expectations, the hope that players are going to get better, because nobody ever goes into an offseason thinking their guys are going to get worse. You ever notice that? No fan, no media person is ever like, you know what? I think this guy's actually going to take a step back. Certainly not at the quarterback spot. Everybody thinks their QB is going to get better in the offseason. I mean, heck, even Jets fans think Aaron Rodgers is going to get better when he didn't even play football last year and he only has one leg. So it's like, nobody thinks their guy's going to get worse. So with the Texans, hey, guys are going to get better. You added in a bunch of talent. The depth was a big emphasis for them. They want to be as deep as possible because they just ran out of dudes at the end of the year last year. They were playing guys that they signed in the middle of the year off the street against Baltimore in the playoffs, and they don't want that to have they don't want to have to deal with that again. And you start thinking about all the things like, hey, they had some injury issues with the safeties last year. They had some injury issues with the offensive line. If they get some positive injury luck, the players get better, yeah, you're right there in the conversation in the AFC Championship game. I'm not going to sit here and tell you they need to be hosting it. That's lofty aspirations, but one of the top 3 teams in the AFC, you should absolutely be in that conversation. And if you're not 30 minutes away from an AFC Championship game or in the AFC Championship game, I mean, that's not where you were last year. That's a step back, and that's probably failure in most people's eyes.
To note what you said about fans not expecting to go backwards on a player, hands up, I'm a Bears fan. I was fully bought into Justin Fields. It's just like, you got to do it. You have to sell yourself on the season, or else it's like, if you go into the season like, oh, this shit's a wash, it just ruins it. I mean, like, there's a couple like degenerates. There's a good community of degenerates out in the offseason who literally watch football content every day, and I'm one of them. And if you don't have hope for the season, it just ruins the whole offseason for you.
The NFL is the best at selling hope. They sell hope better than Obama sold hope back in the day. Like, I mean, they are the best. I mean, teams really, it feels like 30 fan bases and the Giants and the Cowboys fans walk in every year and they're like, we can do this. Yeah, we got this. Like, oh, it's the NFL, any given Sunday. It's like there's there's literally a slogan for hope. It's any given Sunday. Like, I mean, it's fantastic. The NFL product is unmatched in that way.
No, that is a great point. No, and that is 100% true. There definitely is no one better at selling hope than the NFL. So next question, I'm going to tie 2 together here for you, because I feel like if I ask them separately, it'll just kind of be redundant. So first, so we already talked about kind of the addition of Diggs and Mixon, right? Like, how much is it going to help this offense? And then to tie it together, do you think Nico Collins can replicate that same elite season he had last year with the addition of Diggs? Like, or in a way, are they kind of just going to, both be very productive, but we're not going to see the ceiling raised on Nico, if that makes sense?
It's tough to say exactly what you're going to get out of Nico, because I feel like he is ready to bet on himself if he doesn't get a contract. I mean, for a guy that should probably be having contract negotiations with the team, showing up to organized team activities when you don't have to show up, I mean, that's a big step forward, and that's something that, probably helps the negotiation process. You got to realize, Nico Collins puts together another season like he did last year, you're talking about top 5 wide receiver money. Like, he may not be a top 5 wide receiver, but he's getting top 5 wide receiver money. So it's a good thing for the Texans and Collins to talk contract extension, but you would love to see him. You'd almost be happy to make that investment if he went out there and was able to do that. The thing about this wide receiver room and the thing about this offense, and I would tell you that it occurred last year, and I would hope that it's still the same last year. CJ Stroud's throwing to the open guy. Like, he's not throwing to Nico. He's not throwing to Tank. He's throwing to the guy that gets open. So if Stephon Diggs wants the ball, go get open. If Nico Collins wants to pad the stats and get a big contract next year, go get open. Stroud will find you. I mean, the field vision's there. He'll find you. You know, Tank Dell, you want to build on the incredible season you had last year that ended before injury, go get open. He'll find you. Like, CJ Stroud will find the open guy. Like, this offense is not built to get Stephon Diggs the ball. This offense is built to get the open guy the ball. So who's going to be open the most? That's a great question, and that's something that's going to keep defensive coordinators up at length at night. I would tell you this, and you asked about Joe Mixon, they've got to run the football better. I mean, they have got to run the football better. They were one of the 10 worst teams in yards per game last year. They were 29th in yards per carry last year, which is disgusting. They could not run the ball on 3rd and short and 4th and short. They opted for passes at different times because they just didn't have the consistency and the confidence to run the football. Part of that is I just don't believe the investment in Dameon Pierce early in the season was going to pay off for them. It just didn't click for him in this offense. The other part of it is by the time Devin Singletary got rolling, the offensive line's getting juggled every week. It was a mess the whole year long. The offensive line was a total mess. If they could get an offensive line that's only 6 or 7 guys over the course of a 10-week stretch, like, they could really plant their flag from a rushing standpoint and really put some impressive stuff together, help out that passing offense, and help out that defense, because, my God, did I watch time and time again last year, that defense was just gassed because the offense had to throw the ball. They'd go 3 and out, or they get 1 first down, then they'd punt, and then the defense is right back on the field, and you had inferior teams able to move the football, like Atlanta and Carolina a couple different times, because the defense just constantly was on the field and they just couldn't hang on. They lost those 2 games late on field goals because the defense was gassed because they were on the field nonstop. Like, if you run the football better, that's not going to happen. So Mixon's a big key to them running the football, but he's only a key as much as those 5 guys in front of him can take care of some business.
No, yeah, you're spot on. I think, but to your point, I do think the Texans' run game will be a lot better this year, and and if not a lot, significantly enough that it still is an improvement. And to your point, the defense isn't out there as gassed. I'm also happy to hear you echo the same sentiment. Where look, I'm super high on Nico Collins, and when Stephon Diggs first came over, you heard a lot of fans, not necessarily Texans fans, but just NFL fans as a whole, kind of like, oh, Nico's production here it goes, like, it's going way down, and I'm over here like, especially if you're watching the film last year, like, look, man, Nico has really evolved, and especially at the frame he has, now the rapport he has with CJ Stroud, I'm over here like, no, if anything, if you're a Stephon Diggs fantasy owner, you should be a little bit more worried because, to your point, it's going to be who the open man is, but he already has that rapport with Nico Collins. Nico Collins is only younger and ascending, and not that Stephon is still, not Stephon's old, but he's getting older versus with Nico, it's just full ascension from still rising, that star rising.
There are not a lot of guys that are 31 years or older that go out there and rip off 1,000-yard season. There's really not. And that's where Diggs is in his career. I think probably one of the best seasons from an older wide receiver is Brandon Marshall. He had an incredible season late in his career. Keenan Allen's coming off of a 1,000-yard season as an older wide receiver. He's 1 year older than Diggs is. Which probably one of the reasons the Texans were interested in Keenan Allen before they ended up with Stephon Diggs is, production in a later age. And look, for Diggs, I mean, I understand it's also, it's a 1 year. They turned it into a 1 year deal.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Do you think they're kind of banking on Collins kind of excelling and having to sign him? Yeah,
I think, look, whoever plays better and the money makes more sense, that's who you're going to sign long term. You don't want to move on from Nico Collins after he's built that rapport with CJ Stroud, but if he's wanting $30 million a year and you don't want to pay it, okay, see you later. I also don't think it's totally out of the question that Diggs signs up for maybe a couple more years and then you franchise tag Nico and you get him and Tank and Diggs for 1 more year together. That's not what you want to do. Caserio is just the way he talks about the franchise tag. Doesn't seem like something he really wants to use, but I mean, you're seeing it happen in Cincinnati right now. They've got an expensive quarterback. CJ is going to eventually be expensive. He's not right now. They've got one guy that they have to pay at wide receiver in Chase that they haven't yet. And they got one guy they don't want to pay, but they want him on the team still. And so that's why T. Higgins has the franchise tag, and that's why he's going to play that way. So, for Diggs, the motivation's there to have a big season. Teams will know if you're having a big season, even though the stats don't look big. And I think for him, he needs to prove that he's still got wide receiver one talent, regardless of if he puts out wide receiver one production, because a guy like him hitting free agency at, say, 32, unquestioned free agency, no picks associated with going and getting him, he's still looking at $20-25 million a year from a big contract standpoint. So I know he wants production. But teams will know, even if the number one production's not there, if he's still worthy of that number one money or number two money.
So kind of sticking on the offensive side, what would you say is your kind of realistic expectation for Stroud? And then before you answer that, I had a quick question, because obviously it was a big question last year. Before the draft, were you a Stroud or a Young guy?
I was a drafted quarterback at number 2, no matter what. I don't care who's there. I thought Bryce Young was better than C.J. Stroud, though. Okay. I mean, I'm not afraid to say it. Like, I mean, you know who
I
else
don't think
thought
anyone knew. No one knew what he would be.
You know who else thought Bryce Young was better than C.J. Stroud? The Houston Texans, because they tried to trade up to number 1 because they wanted Bryce Young. So, sometimes you can – I think at one point in the process, they were uncomfortable with the thought of C.J. Stroud, and then I believe they got comfortable with the thought of C.J. Stroud. I felt like they had to make a quarterback investment. You had to make that swing. And my preference in order was Bryce Young 1, C.J. Stroud 2. And then I didn't love Richardson or Will Levis. I didn't love either of those guys. But, if it gotten to that, I would have said Richardson and then Will Levis. But yeah, so I was a Bryce Young guy, but I was also a QB no matter what guy.
Right.
So as soon as I knew Bryce Young was coming off the board, I was a CJ Stroud guy. So that's the way I kind of parse it. As far as CJ's expectations for this year, I mean, be better than last year, certainly.
Right.
I am excited to see what he can do with this offense, because he had some success outside of the offense. This is always a big thing with Deshaun Watson. When I would watch him play when he played for the Texans, Deshaun would have success independent of the offense. Like he'd go out there and make a play. He'd roll out when he didn't need to roll out. He'd make a nice play. Like Watson went out there and made plays in a bad offense. Bill O'Brien's offense was a bad offense. Stroud is fully aware that this is a good offense, and if he needs to just make the play, make the play. But he's also got that playmaker instinct. Hey, if the play's not there to be made, let's go try to make a different play. Let's go try to make a big play. The structure of the offense, with them hopefully running the ball better, the offensive line being healthier, and Stephon Diggs getting added, the structure of the offense should have a higher ceiling. So operating within the structure should make him an even better player. I mean, he didn't turn the ball over a lot last year, didn't even throw a lot of turnover-worthy plays, turnover-worthy throws, easy for me to say. He didn't even make a ton of those throws last year. So, like, that's got to stick. That's got to stick around. Don't take unnecessary risks. And, look, I think efficiency for him is a thing that if it ticks up, I mean, the efficiency was not great last year. But part of that was wide receivers were hurt, offensive line stunk. They played from behind a couple of different times. It's like the efficiency wasn't always there. If he gets more efficient and puts that together within the structure of the offense and keeps his kind of that playmaker instinct, I mean, this is a guy that could easily find himself in the 30s from touchdowns, less than 10 interceptions, and then that puts you probably somewhere around the conversation of the MVP award. I don't know if he's going to be necessarily in the MVP conversation, because that just feels like, honestly, that feels like Josh Allen just goes and has a monster Josh Allen year, even though the Bills aren't any good, and he wins it maybe. But, I think he's going to have a really productive season. His charge is to be more efficient, but not lose that playmaker tendency.
No, 100%. I mean, Dobbs, right? I'll let you go with your question, but I don't think MVP is completely out of the question. Dobbs made a good point the other day, like Stroud or even Jordan Love, like those guys, just how much they elevate their team can lead to MVP status. When you look at who else is on the field with them, obviously Texans have a way more high-powered offense. It'd be a little bit of a different story, but at the end of the day, like these young guys are really making themselves known in a league where, all kind of the older quarterbacks are finding their way out of the league at this point.
you gotta put the story around the MVP campaign.
Right.
You know, like you couldn't really put a story together for Brock Purdy. Oh, he came back from an elbow injury and he's on the best team in the NFC.
Right.
Cool story. Like, oh, Lamar's put the Ravens on his back again when nobody thought he could do it, coming off of an injury-plagued year the year before. Oh, okay, easy story to tell.
Right.
No, that's a great point. That it is. The story is definitely something that a lot of people don't always consider, but it is the biggest part of the MVP. It always is. So next question I have here for you, and this is one where again we've talked about how the Texans, right? Like if you were to say that there's not even really one group that worries you, I wouldn't even blame you. But is there one group on this team, or a side of the ball, or just a group like a group on the team where the depth worries you at all, or are you pretty confident in every room in this team because you guys have built a very good roster? I mean, there's no debating that at this point. You guys have turned things around so quickly.
I'm pretty worried about the secondary as a whole, and that's primarily because they have a lot of guys who have injury-riddled pasts. I mean, Derek Stingley was awesome once he got past his injury last year. Notice I had to put once he got past his injury. This guy's had 4 straight seasons of football, 2 in college, 2 in the NFL, that have been drastically affected by injury, and he's the number 1 corner. The guy behind him is Jeff Okudah, who's on his 3rd team after being the 3rd overall pick and has injury history. CJ Henderson, 3rd team after being a top 10 pick and has an injury history. Desmond King was on this team a year ago, got cut in training camp, and they brought him back in the middle of the year because the guy that took his spot got hurt. And then Kamari Lassiter's a 2nd-round rookie. So the depth at cornerback, yes, you have options, but you also have options that you could very quickly be in a weird cornerback spot if you're the Texans, very quickly. And then the flip side of that for the safety spot, Jimmy Ward, injury concerns. He's basically never played a full season of football. His key backup is Eric Murray. He got hurt last year. The key backup for Murray is MJ Stewart. He got hurt last year. If those guys can't play, Kalen Bullock's got to play. Well, Kalen Bullock is a 3rd-round pick, and I know there's a lot of people that really like him. He's small.
Very
the wear
small.
and tear, he's tall, but he's thin. I'm worried about the wear and tear for him if he has to play a whole bunch. And then Jalen Petrie, he was healthy last year, but he stunk. He wasn't good. So I'm worried about the secondary. Now, the job is easier if Stingley's healthy and the front 7 does what they're supposed to do. But it's still, they had Okudah and Henderson out there at OTAs, and they're getting cooked by Xavier Hutchinson, who's a 6th-round pick last year. And I know it's 7-on-7, it's OTAs, and it's the cornerback position. You're going to get cooked, but it's a tenuous position. You couldn't, there was a lot of stuff you wanted to upgrade. There's a lot of stuff you wanted to change, make better. You can't do everything in one offseason. That's part of the reason Lassiter's here, because he's a long-term solution at that cornerback spot, because Okudah, Henderson, Desmond King, the backup to King, Bryant that they brought over for the Patriots, all those guys are on 1-year deals. The other corner they brought in Ford, he's a career special teamer. So, the Lassiter's here for the long term, and if he plays well, he'll be the cornerback too. They're not afraid to start a rookie. They don't care. They want the 11 best dudes on the field all the time. So I'm worried about the secondary. Now, if they stay healthy, shut it down. That's a top 10 defense. And maybe better. That it could get real scary for opposing offenses if that secondary stays healthy and plays better than it did last year. But one injury could sort of start to topple things for the Texans in the secondary. If a guy certainly if Stingley went down, they'd be in a lot of trouble. They would need that pass rush to be even better than we think it's going to be.
No, yeah, I was going to say, when you look at the depth chart, that's really the only area I would say I would be concerned with too. It's because everywhere else you have so much depth, but yeah, the DB room. But to your point, there's young guys that are going to be very hungry to prove themselves. And if they can just stay healthy and have good seasons for you guys, and I think you would agree, let me know how you feel about this. I think probably ideally if Lassiter could have a thriving season in the slot and you could find someone else on the outside to come step up with Stingley, that's probably best case scenario. Because as we know, the questions around Lassiter have been really, he's a guy, great tape. It's just, is his athleticism going to transition to the NFL at a level where he's going to be able to go out there and compete week to week? Look, that's a question we have to see answered. But that's why I said, having him in that slot role probably is the most ideal spot to have him. You get him in the run game, which we know he's really good at as well. So if that can be the situation, you don't have to move a bunch of pieces around and, be playing chess the whole time. This DB room definitely has a lot of potential, albeit that it's shaky right now.
Yeah, look, they've got bodies. Like some teams don't even have bodies. Like some teams are just looking around like, oh, this is a rough situation. And they've got bodies. I just don't know what they're going to do if some of those bodies go on injured reserve for a few weeks or they're
Right.
out for 2 weeks or something like that. And they all have injury history. So, I mean, there's options. I would tell you this. I think in a perfect world, Lassiter's their outside corner opposite Stingley. I think that's what they would love to see happen. I mean, he can play inside. I don't think it's out of the question if he plays well enough, he could start opposite Stingley. You have one of the vets back him up, and you have, a couple of different options for that inside cornerback slot. Desmond King, who played pretty well once he came back for the Texans, got off the couch. And I forget the guy's name. It's Bryant's his last. I think it's Miles Bryant, the kid they brought over from the Patriots, who as soon as he got released or signed to another team, Patriots fans threw a damn party on Twitter. So he can't be that good, So. Look, Lassiter's inside-outside versatility is great. He's almost here to be the super sub until he's ready to start. So I like it. I ended up liking the pick a lot more after I thought about it and did some more looking at it than in the moment. In the moment, I was obsessed with Kool-Aid. I wanted McKinstry, but based on the way they're going to operate at cornerback now, I wonder if McKinstry was ever even a consideration. They might have wanted somebody more versatile, kind of like Lassiter.
Well, I'll tell you, as a Saints fan, it makes me happy to hear you were looking forward to Kool-Aid because now he fell into our lap. So, and I was high on him too, but I had him right around like CB3 or 4. But you know what? I'm damn happy we got him, especially where we got him. So I'm happy to hear, more. Those, other people were also looking at Kool-Aid.
Boy, I'm sure you guys talk about it, but that Saints situation it's a unique situation to be in, man.
Yeah. Unique is putting it nicely, but I appreciate your I appreciate you not laying into the Saints because putting it unique is about as nice as you could put it.
Yeah, it's unique. Let's leave it at that.
As we move in kind of to the end part of the interview, we got some more just kind of a couple overarching questions about the team. Which Texan do you peg to have the biggest leap going into this year?
Ooh, this is tough. I mean, there's a chance Tank Dell's better than he was last year, which is pretty scary to think about if you're an opposing defense. And you think about where, if Diggs and Collins are on the field, Tank Dell's getting the third corner, Tank Dell's getting a safety, Tank Dell's getting Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator for the Texans, dreams about a linebacker ending up on Tank Dell. Like that'd be a dream because the Tank would destroy any linebacker in the league, basically. Maybe Fred Warner and Roquan Smith probably, But I digress. Like Tank could be better, and this is coming off of season-ending leg injury last year. He got shot 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, what the fuck?
Like he got shot, and I'd still be in the hospital bed. Like I'd still be laid up, hitting on the nurses, like, and this guy was out here 3 weeks after at OTAs, easily just dispatching defensive backs like nothing. Like, and then the workout videos, I'm doing my amateur scout timing, watching him on the videos, and I'm like, I think he just ran that 40 in a 4.2, like a 4.3, like even faster than his 40 time was, a year ago. And I'm just like, okay, like maybe Tank takes a step forward, and that's a big one. Will Anderson was already really good, so it's hard for me to say like he's going to take a big step. Maybe I'll go with Christian Harris. So D'Amico Ryans talked a lot about Christian Harris, and now that last year was his second year in the league, but D'Amico multiple times said he treated Christian Harris like he was a rookie last year, and Ryans talks about nonstop the jump that a player will take from year 1 to year 2. So, okay, now Christian Harris is actually going to be in year 3, but it's year 2 with D'Amico Ryans. And D'Amico wants that big jump to happen. Like, and they have not done a lot at the linebacker spot. I mean, they brought in Azeez Al-Shire to play that, that green dot linebacker spot, but there's a lot of faith in Christian Harris. And I can tell you the exact moment that Christian Harris' season took off last year. I was sitting there watching the Tampa Bay Buccaneers play the Texans at NRG Stadium, and I texted a buddy of mine, and I just said, yeah, Christian Harris has been a huge disappointment. He just cannot figure it out. And literally from the moment I sent that text message, Christian Harris had a fantastic season. It was like the universe like spoke it into his brain and he just flipped the switch. Like he was really good rest of the season. And so I think he could have a big jump. You have a nasty linebacking duo in Alshire and Harris, along with that front seven. There could be some things that you're really starting to build and turn into a really nice defense. So I'll go with him. I can't find anybody else that makes a lot of sense. So I'll go with Christian Harris because, I mean, like a big jump for Tank is like one of the, he'd be one of the better wide receivers in all of football. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but, Tank's, I'll tell you a story. This is a good story. We're probably 3 weeks into training camp last year, and D'Amico Ryans always does his presser right after the training camp practice. Well, we had Tank Dell that day. So D'Amico Ryans is walking off, and Tank Dell's walking up, and he's like, oh, we got Tank today. He goes, hey, quit killing all my defensive backs. And he just walked away. And we're like 3 weeks into training camp, and I'm like, the coach is saying that to the guy, like, yeah, it's a joke. He's like having some fun, but like, that's what Tank was doing. And then the real eye-opening thing was the Dolphins came to town for joint practices, and the first day of joint practices, uncoverable. I mean, him and CJ Stroud hooked up on 3 touchdowns in team period against the Dolphins. And I was like, this guy's going to be freaking sweet. And he turned out to be freaking sweet, So, and it's like now with the off season, obviously, hopefully no more tragic incidents. And, Tank Dell could be a really, really fun player for this team.
We're both huge Tank fans. I don't think there's a player that enamored me more quickly than Tank Dell. Like we have a Ohio State fan, and he was for some reason all over Tank before the draft last year, and I was like, okay. And then Dobbs was pretty over Tank too, and once he got into the Texans, I was like, oh my God, this guy is unreal. Like, he is just so good, and the fact that he gets to be a wide receiver 3 is so huge.
Yeah. And look, wide receiver 1, 2, and 3 is determined on who's open or not. So
right,
he'll be wide receiver 1 more than a few times because he could get open with some of those lesser matchups against him.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, I would say I'm with you. There's definitely a few, if not more, Texans you could point to that could have a huge breakout this year, which is just another reason why there's so much excitement. Yeah. And so to transition to the next question, we've kind of already covered the first part of it. We've kind of covered the ceiling, right? The Texans could be a Super Bowl team, right? We've talked about how that's the ceiling. But then on the other side of the coin, what would you say you'd view the floor this year as for this team?
The floor is a wild card team. The Colts are. I don't believe in Anthony Richardson, and I also don't believe he can stay healthy. But I also fully understand that what he showcased when he was healthy is a pretty unique and dynamic talent. And I think the world of their head coach, Shane Steichen. I think he's one of the best coaches in all of football. And what he did last year deserved more consideration for Coach of the Year than it received. So I think the Colts are a really solid team. They had a lot of bad injury luck last year. They got to play much better on defense. They did not do a lot this offseason, but they're betting on basically being healthy and being a good football team. And I get that. The Jaguars don't scare me as much. I don't believe in their offensive talent. And their defense has a little more juice to it because Travon Walker finally started to come on a little bit towards the back end of the year. And defensive Josh Allen is really good. Let's see how he is with the big contract, but defensive Josh Allen's really good. So, I mean, I would tell you the floor for the Texans is, I mean, if they're not one of the 7 best teams in the AFC, what are we doing? Like, what happened? Something terrible happened from an injury standpoint. With health, I don't know how they're not one of the teams that makes the playoffs. I just don't see that. Obviously, if a bunch of guys get hurt, this thing could fall apart pretty quick. But with health, even if they have some disappointing stretches, it's a tough schedule too. They got a real tough schedule. I think it's the 6 weeks before the bye week, and then coming out of the bye week, it's pretty tough. Late bye, so that kind of builds up on you a little bit. But I think the floor is a wild card team, and probably the wild card team nobody wants to see, to be honest with you.
No, yeah, me and Hunter agree 100%. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Hunter, where'd you have them? On our power rankings, I know we both had them top 10. I think we both had them at number 6 or 5.
Yeah, I think I had them, you know what, let me pull it up, but yeah, I had them within the top 5. I'm very high on the Texans this year. Very excited to watch them.
I would say it'd be very hard for me to to, take Detroit for what you will. I think CJ Stroud's better than Jared Goff. I think there's going to be stretches where Goff plays better than Stroud, but CJ's a better player. I think the team is more complete. I think the coach is better. Dan Campbell's. I'm not there yet on Dan Campbell. I've always felt he's kind of like a gimmick almost. But like, if you want to tell me the Ravens and the Chiefs are better than the Texans, I'll listen to it. The Chiefs are the Chiefs. The Ravens took care of the Texans twice last year, once at the beginning of the year, once at the end of the year. So, okay, they're ahead. San Fran's awesome. They're ahead. You want to say Philly bouncing back, being healthy, they're ahead. I can't find you another team that's better than the Texans after those four. Like, I really can't. And I'd fight you on Philly too. So I really 4 or 5, maybe 6 is where kind of I think the power rankings are for the Texans, and that's where I believe they're probably going to hover most of the year too.
Yeah, that we both had them at 6. Just these last 2 questions for you.
Yep.
What are your opinions on the new jersey, and then all the new jerseys, and then also, what is your favorite Texans memory?
Okay, so the new jerseys are great. I said this, so I got to see the jerseys before they came out, which was hard to not say anything to all the fans that wanted to know and stuff like that. But seeing the jerseys and seeing what they were doing, I knew that the gear associated with the jerseys was going to be even cooler than the actual jerseys. Like, people wear jerseys to the games and stuff like that, but I think one person said it really good to me. They're a teacher, and they said, hey, I can't wear a jersey to school on Friday, but I can wear a sick polo to school on Friday.
Yeah.
And sure enough, the gear has just been incredible, and they keep rolling out new stuff. It's been good. I really like the alternate logo. The red uniform is my favorite. It's going to look really good when they go all red. It's going to look really good when they go red helmets, red jerseys, white pants. So I think that's the jerseys. They did a really good job. The blue getting a little bit darker has been a tough adjustment, but I think it's probably a Nike thing, and they wanted their own blue. They claimed that they had the same blue as some other teams, yada, yada, is some of the nerdy uniform stuff. But I like the uniforms. Obviously a little bit of H-Town blue in there with the fourth alternate. And then down the road, eventually the NFL is going to allow a fourth helmet. Down the road, when they add a white helmet into the mix, everything's going to be really fun to watch, to mix and match. So then they're really happy with it. The fans are really happy with it. And, they did a dangerous thing where they tried to please everybody with 4 different uniforms. And I feel like they did a pretty darn good job. There's some people that'll never be happy, but they did a pretty darn good job. All right, and Texans memory. Okay, let me see here. So I have some specific to me, and then I have like some that like every Texans fan's gonna remember. The one specific to me is I got to go to the first game ever at NRG Stadium. Not the Cowboys game, not the game in the regular season that counted, but the preseason game. It was preseason game. It was hot. My God, it was hot outside. We cooked, we tailgated in the parking lot. It was like a Saturday afternoon game. Tailgated in the parking lot, and I remember we forgot plates. So we ate, everybody, for some reason, we had like 10 Frisbees. And so everybody used a Frisbee as a plate. And it was the Dolphins. And I got to see Ricky Williams, and he played like, I think, 1 series. And I think he ran for like 90 yards on 1 series, scored a touchdown, and then was done for the day. Like, he had like 6 carries, 90 yards, touchdown, and that was it. I can't remember, but that's what it feels like in my memory. So I think that's one that always sticks out to me personally. As far as ones that I think every Texans fan has experienced, I mean, demolishing Cleveland last year or this past year in the playoffs was, that's a starter for like a new era. Like, that's a starter memory for the new era, because they just come to your house a couple weeks ago and punched you in the teeth, and you looked like you had no chance against them, and it looked like their offense was going to be awesome, and then you crushed Joe Flacco, sent him back to the couch. That one's fantastic. DeAndre Hopkins on Monday Night Football against the Cowboys, where he like fought through like 5 Cowboys after the catch to like, I think, get in field goal position. I think that's what it was. Deshaun in the playoffs against Buffalo. It's cool because they won that game. Josh Allen kind of handed it to the Texans like he was an idiot in that game, but it's still cool that they won. Obviously, there's like 20 J.J. Watt moments that are just
Yeah.
legendary. From the pick six in the playoffs after they made the playoffs for the very first time to just, I mean, being a monster at a variety of times over the course of the season. And then for some reason, I always have like, I mean, I'll never forget 24-0 against Kansas City. Like that's the most disgusting thing that's ever happened to this franchise. You have you're up 24-0 on the Chiefs, and you would have hosted the AFC Championship game the following week against the Titans, who you'd taken care of business against in the regular season. Like, it was a perfect scenario. Like, that's a memory I'll never forget.
Yeah,
it's not a positive one, but it's a memory I'll never forget from this team. So I think that's the one that. And then, I mean, Andre Johnson bowling through the Cardinals players. Andre Johnson to win the game against Washington. And then, honestly, this is going to. I mean, because I will remember forever the exact moment, who I was in the room with, where I was when they drafted C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson back to back. Like, that's.
I'm sure that was incredible.
Obviously, I think those guys are going to be really awesome, but like we were lucky enough to be in Kansas City covering it when I worked at the radio station that I worked at, and they wouldn't put the sound on in the media room, so we went into like a little security guard like side room, and the lady was like, "You can't be in here," and we were like, "You have the sound on. We cover Houston Texans. They're picking number 2. Like, can we just stand in here for 10 minutes? You know, the pick happens, and then we go back to the media room." She goes, "Yeah, sure." So they make the CJ Stroud pick. Me and my co-host at the time, we're pumped, we're excited, and she's like, "Okay, you guys got to go." And then we turn as she's like kind of fettering us out, and we're like, "No, they're picking again." She's like, "You said it was one pick." I was like, "No, they're picking again. We gotta watch this one too, lady." And she was like, "All right, sure, come on." So that was great. Like a little room closet in some fancy hotel in Kansas City when like the franchise changed again. There've been some franchise changing moments, but that I'll always remember that one too. And that one's a non-player moment, so that was a good one too. And I'll always remember when Brian Gaine got fired when I was getting a haircut in the middle of the summer. That too.
Well, you have a great list of Texans memories, seriously, Cody.
A lot.
I got way more bad ones than good ones, unfortunately. I got a bunch of just like, I can't believe that happened. Like, I can, because it's the Houston Texans.
Well, thank you so much, Cody. We really appreciate your time today. Do you want to let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Find me on YouTube. Just type in the name Cody Stoots, CODYSTOOTS. And then, of course, Houston football. We do all my writing about the team. HOUfootball.com is where you can find it. And, man, it's no better time to climb on and be a Texans fan than right now. So if you got some undecided fans, Houston will welcome you with open arms. And then the Texans got a lot of, fantasy players that I'm sure get, the extra attention from people too. So it's a good time to be a Texans fan. Good time to talk about it too.
Well, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, if you don't know ball and want to know ball, be sure to subscribe. Leave a like. Let us know in the comments what you think the Houston Texans record will be this year. And we hope you have a great rest of your night.